Welcome to today's RUC People, and I'm joined by Cheryl Hewson, who is a relatively new member here and has been, I think, with us for just over a year. So this is a chance to get to know her a bit better, and so we're delighted you can join us today, Cheryl. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Russell. I would like actually to begin by really appreciating what you are giving us through these Let's Get to Know RUC community. Being a new member, I was here about 6 weeks, we went into COVID, I wasn't either well, so it's really been a fabulous way for me to get to know the community.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Right, well, Cheryl, can I start by asking how you found your way to RUC?
That's a good question, because I wonder how I can describe it. I am steeped in Methodism. I am a loyal Methodist, and my whole spiritual life has been hugely enriched by marrying into a very famous Methodist family. So I was reading the other night, Dr. Professor Leslie Arthur Hewson, called Lama, was head of New Testament studies at Rhodes University, and I married his son Glyn. And I had been baptized and confirmed in the Methodist Church, but through this marriage and integration into the family was marvelous. What happened was that so we were at Rosebank Methodist Church, Glyn and I and the children, and Glyn was born in the manse. It was his father's first position placement. And then the Mowbray Mossop Methodist Church started in Little Mowbray. And I thought, this is how I've always wanted to live. I can walk to church. And so Mark Stevenson started there, and in 2009 we started going to that church. And it was a lovely, once again, something about small and simplicity, easy access. But they closed down. There was a restructuring, and I had heard about Robert through my goddaughter, Bridget, Sullen and Rennie. I'd come here once with her, and then my very dear friend, Jill Wenman, who's Buddhist, and she's an art teacher in observatory, and she said, Robert Steiner, his children did art with me, consider going to Rondebosch United. So then Robert met me 6 weeks before I went in for my first treatment for chemotherapy. And my sister-in-law, Di Hewson, she recommended I make myself known to the minister in case the journey doesn't go too well. And that's where I told him the bear and bunny story. So that's how Robert met me and how I've continued to come. But it's largely been on YouTube.
Yes, with joining the church in the middle of a pandemic when we're not meeting very often must have been tricky. But thankfully things are getting back to some kind of normality.
Yeah.
So,
especially communion.
Yeah.
I mean, that I really missed, those months online and not having communion,
Yeah. Oh, well, hopefully over the next few weeks you'll have a chance to meet more people and for them to meet you. So,
yes.
So, Cheryl, tell us just a bit more about yourself. What are you doing now? Are you retired? Where do you live?
I am blissfully retired. I live in Little Mowbray, so it's that part of Mowbray which is close to Rosebank, where it's George's Grammar School and Rhodes High School. And next year I'll have been there for 30 years. And we're starting at the end of my career, so that's fine. So my sixth career, after I'd had a second experience with cancer, was that I had to give up my work as a life coach. Well, I didn't have to, I chose. And I was coaching coaches. I was working for an organisation, and I knew I didn't have the emotional, the spiritual, the physical strength to continue doing that work. So I went to see the director, Dr. Paddy Paisley, and I said, I'm going to now withdraw. And I drove straight to UCT, to the off-campus student accommodation, registered my name, and since 2015 I've been incarnated as a landlady, and I have masters, postgraduate, researchers and doctoral theses living in my home with me, and it has been wonderful. Because I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm a life coach, so they get much more than a room.
Whether they like it or not.
True. What they love most of all, because I've needed to compile all their report backs, is that they love it that they're in a home. It's a home away from home.
Yes.
So we actually all live together, so we're living in community. It's not a garden flat or a separate. We actually have endless conversations in the kitchen.
How many people in your house?
Usually it's myself. At the moment, I don't have anyone. Sadly, the online has affected that. I either have one of my children who are in between jobs, so that's 2, and then 2 students. 4 is max.
Right.
I have had 5, but we share a lot of the facilities. It's not a big house.
Okay.
It's a lovely, real little Mowbray cottage. You know those ones with a doorway that's a smile and windows on either side with the eyes and a roof with a chimney.
Cool. Well, let's go back a few years then, Cheryl, and maybe we'll work our way through your 6 careers and and a few other things along the way. So tell us where it all began. Where were you born, and a little bit about your childhood and your family.
Well, I was born in Mossel Bay, and I was born on a very stormy morning. I guess my mother was labouring on the night before, and at 5 to 7 on the 23rd of July 1951, I entered the world in a small village in those days in Mossel Bay. We lived in the very same home that my father had grown up in, that he was born in, and it overlooked the Bay of Mussels with the Outeniqua Mountains in the background. And my father was a dentist. He'd taken over his father's practice. Our name was Johnson, so I was Cheryl Johnson. My mother and father had met at Wits University. My mother studied to be a physiotherapist and my dad at dental school. And I had an idyllic childhood. 4 years particularly, because my brother was then born in 1955. So I have a brother, Johnny Johnson. He lives in Fishook with his wife, Nina. And in 1960, in August, my brother Paul was born, 9 years between us. And that's basically where the family for 10 years in the 50s, we lived. I walked everywhere. I walked down to Santos Beach. I walked to the library. I walked to school. I walked to my father's surgery if I wanted to visit him. Yeah, it was...
So Mossel Bay for the first 10 years, you
10
said.
years.
And then?
And I also started school there.
Right.
Which, when you mentioned transitions, it was overwhelming. I think I would have much rather stayed at home with my mother. So I found going to big school. Nursery school was delightful. We went to Tangi Ace's nursery school, but the Park Primary School was a dual medium school, and I was conscientious. I cried a lot. I was frightened, and I think I ran home just to get back there. So it was a major transition for me. So linking that transition to the next one, which was shocking, because we left the smallness and the security of Mossel Bay, and my father joined a practice in Clarkstorp, or Klerksdorp.
Northwest, yeah.
Northwest, in those days the Western Transvaal, and it was a triangle of mines, Stilfontein, Clarkstorp and Orkney. And I kind of went, I did go to schools. I was in Standard 2, I went to Milner Primary School, and then on to Milner High School, and they were government schools, ordinary government schools, English, because of course all the schools were separated into English and Afrikaans. And I think the best part of going to school was making a lifelong friend. And Christine and I are still besties. We both live in Cape Town now, and I think that was my salvation at school.
Oh, wonderful story.
Yeah, I was conscientious. I did reasonably well. I was vice head girl. I loved the extramurals. I, participated always in athletics. I was the tallest person in the group, so it was high jump and it was hurdles. I loved break because the mums made toasted curried mince sandwiches and cheese and tomato sandwiches. That's a lovely memory. And then I also participated in extramural speech and drama classes, separate from the school. So languages I loved. I have a vivid memory because I'm feeling the political environment of South Africa was quite separate in the 50s, and it only began to be seen through my eyes in the 60s. And so we ended up living on a small holding just outside of the town of Clarkstorp. And it was a safe and secure world. But both my brother and I talk about that gut feeling that there was something awkward and that wasn't right in this world. So the separatists of the languages, the various peoples of South Africa, our home was, once again, it was a lovely place. It was acres of African savanna land and acacia trees, lots of space, blue skies. My father, as a hobby, was a gentleman farmer, so all the vegetables were grown off the land. We had rabbits. One thing I haven't mentioned that's a thread through my story are dogs. I've always had a dog in my life, a very close companion. And in Mossel Bay, it was Punch. He was a wire-haired fox terrier. On the plot, to Barely, it was called, I had a German shepherd called Sir Lancelot, and my white rabbit was Guinevere. And we also had Butch, another wire-haired fox terrier. They're the best dogs ever for families. They are so full of character and so much fun. But I want to read this lovely, just kind of defines the Taberli is the name of the shield that the Matabele used to protect themselves during times of conflict. My mother grew up in southern Rhodesia, and she knew a lot about the Matabele people. And this quote was on a plaque at our front door, so lonesome and so perfectly secure. Not melancholy, no, for it is green and bright and fertile, furnished in itself with a few needful things that life requires. Kind of sums up both the 50s and the 60s.
Mm.
Am I politically awake? Not politically conscious.
Mm. But that came, maybe, over time.
It came, certainly did, yeah.
So Clarksdorp, what did you...
So Clarksdorp, after matriculating, I wanted to be on radio. By then, there was awareness of a love of words, of language, communicating. And in South Africa, in the 1970s, if you wanted to be part of the SABC, you needed to be a bilingual, and very bilingual.
Mm.
So I did a drama course at Potchefstroom University for higher education.
Mm.
And I learned to speak Afrikaans beautifully. And Afrikaans as a language settled into the marrow of my bones in those years. When I was in London and studying in London and I felt homesick, I'd read Afrikaans poetry.
Okay.
An interesting thing that happened while I was writing, so I'm here at the university, but my huisvader at the Caroline Koshuis was Dr. Willem Wimpy de Klerk.
Mm.
And he, with the death now of F.W. de Klerk, he was his eldest brother,
Yes.
Wimpy de Klerk. And he was a Dutch Reformed priest, a journalist, and an academic ahead of his time.
Mm.
In the 70s, he coined the two words, verlig, meaning enlightened, and verkramp, ultra-conservative. I found him a gentleman and a very fine scholar. And I have subsequently heard that he convinced F.W. de Klerk to release Nelson Mandela.
Mm.
So that's an interesting moment right now with the death of his brother, to think of an influence like that in my life at the hostel. And after that, I did a teaching diploma at Stellenbosch University, and that was also one of those transitional moments, not quite shocking, but that ways are opened and prepared, where you only know with hindsight. I arrived there and they said, "Jammer, Juffrou Johnson, jy het net een skoolvak, so you can only teach English. Drama isn't a subject in the schools." I said, "But I'm sure you can do something with the drama as part of a school curriculum." I'd also done an honours at Natal University where I'd been introduced to theatre in education. So I thought, now drama in education, surely let's get into it. And this wonderful dean of the faculty, Professor Swart, said, "All right, you can register to do your senior teaching diploma, report to a lecturer who heads up drama and write an assignment. You'll find books in the library and you can do both." And the very next year, in 1976, I think there were 29 drama posts created in the Cape Province, the big Cape Province.
Wonderful. So
And that's what I did.
And it sounds like you've found your way around the country. So far we've heard of Mossel Bay, Clarksdorp, Potchefstroom, University of Natal,
Yes.
you're in Durban,
Yeah.
and in Stellenbosch.
Yes.
So you're getting around a bit. I mean, and was this all as a single person, or?
All as a single person. So now we find the next twinkle moment, because I get appointed at Westerford High School as the Afrikaans drama teacher. They've already got an English drama teacher part-time, and I'm located within the languages department, both English and Afrikaans. And the first meeting with the English department is in January 1976 in Muswell Hill Road at the home of Chris Horan. And Glenn Hewson is the member of the English department. So it's the first time we meet. And that's the beginning of my drama teaching career at Westerford. I absolutely loved the 10 years as a drama teacher.
10 years.
In between, so Glenn and I only started going out in 78. I was awarded a bursary to study at Central School of Speech and Drama in London at Swiss Cottage. And now I'm beginning to certify myself in drama and education. Is it not amazing to think that there's a dean of a faculty who just gives you a moment? You break the boundaries, you're an outlier, and here I get a chance. I was awarded an overseas bursary from the Western Cape Education Department, and off I go.
To London to study in Swiss Cottage. And so, what was the status with you and Glenn at the time? Were you married by then?
We were madly, absolutely in love, and distance lends enchantment. We wrote letters.
Right.
Oh, no, phone calls now and then. Glenn loved a long phone call, but it flourished. And in 1979, in the July, he joined me, and we had a lovely holiday. Blissful times, yeah. We went to the Edinburgh Festival, and we went to Cornwall, and we also travelled to America. And
so for how long were you in?
about 20 months.
20 months.
20 months.
And so it was really distance apart from the holiday with Glenn.
Yeah.
But it certainly survived the
relationship. Definitely, it was flourishing. It was nurtured through this communication. I had a real intention. I would journal, send him letters. Glenn has a beautiful way with language. It's his birthday today. He would have been 81 today on the 13th of November. And I came back then to Westerford. Another difficult transition, huh? You come back to everything that's the same work, my same little cottage in observatory, the same relationship, the same family, the country, of course, by now, the 80s. I mean, I'd already been awakened living in Cape Town. Glenn was very involved with the political scene because he edited with Professor Francis Wilson the ecumenical newspaper, the South African Outlook. And so the death of Steve Biko was shocking. You know, I went into London carrying that burden of being a South African outside of South Africa. So the 80s, well, I'd sort of become a bit of a feminist living in London, as well as being far more politically aware. And so as drama teacher, every production had to have a social justice theme. And the first one was Oh, What a Lovely War, which was incredibly difficult to do because it was based on the Second World War and a real statement about don't send our boys to war. And of course our boys were on the border. And the students were not that invested in war, but they definitely came together. The best thing about that production is it requires ensemble. And in certain schools, and I must say at Westerford, they were very competitive. Academic school, and this really allowed people to work as a company. So that was the first play in 81, 82, Genesis Roadshow. Coburg has been bombed on the West Coast. We've got to look at nuclear fallout, nuclear war. And this play takes place in a fallout shelter. I combined that with an Afrikaans play. There were two short plays. And then 83 was Antigone, which is one individual who has to stand up against her brother, who represents the state. Fantastic play. Wonderful, wonderful. Good production. I really enjoyed that. And then Glenn and I got married.
Wonderful. And so did that mean moving house or?
It meant we took a long time, 5 years, both very individuals. We both had studied abroad. We had our interests, our separate lives. Now we've got to bring them together. We bought a house in Oxford Road in Observatory. We called it the Red Door.
It's where Robert lives.
Where Robert lives, the other end of Oxford Road. And in 84, we had our honeymoon, 3 months abroad, because in those years we were given a sabbatical every 5 years. So we went honeymooning, and once again it was to the UK. A lot of Glenn's family is from Norfolk, and we went to South America first. It was London, South America, North America, Europe, and home. And when one talks about thin places, and Glenn's long hope was to go to Machu Picchu. And what an experience. That's a thin place. And in those days, there was a little tractor that would take people up from the Urubamba River, and we could stay in a little hotel that ran on a generator at night, and it was full moon.
Wonderful.
And 85, I left Westerford, and Jess, my daughter, was born on the 27th of May, 1985. I chose to stay at home with the children. Daniel was born in 1987, in September. And in that time, I've always, Russell, I've loved working in the world. I really have. I think I gave a huge amount of myself and my energy to work. And I did NGO part-time work. And that was where I began to work across cultural groups. I worked for the Reed organisation. I did a lot of adjudicating for their Stedfords. I worked with a drama workshop in Athlone, directed by Phyllis Klotz, part-time work with UCT's drama and education students, and then started working for the Business Skills and Development Centre, where women from the Eastern Cape who had a matric were skilled up to go into corporate, and BP, Cheryl and all those big companies funded them, and then they got work immediately in the corporations. And one of our students was Temba Bavuma's mother. Yeah, not that I have any contact with her, but I have subsequently been told that. Yes, that great cricketer. And then it was time for full-time work.
So you had a period when you had the two children?
Yes.
Where you stepped aside from work altogether, or you were just doing bits and pieces, and for how long was that?
Bits and pieces from 1985 to about 1990, and then 91.
Time to go back to full-time work.
Yeah, and when you take a gap of 5 years in your career, hard work getting back. I was offered 2 drama posts, one at Herschel and one back at Stellenbosch at the very faculty where I'd been educated. It felt like it wasn't the right time to to be so full-time involved and moved to Stellenbosch. Glenn had just left Westerford and he'd started work at Bishop's. And I didn't think that having 2 teachers and 2 young children would be a good recipe, because I know how much extramural activities, particularly with drama and both language teachers marking. So I chose to go into tertiary education, and I was given a contract at Peninsula Technikon in the communications department, and I lectured professional English across all the faculties. Well, in those days they were called schools. Very wide awake. Now, I couldn't step back from politics. Franklin Sonn was the rector, and I mean, I taught the journalism students, and I mean, I just think of some of them that are on Cape Talk now, have done so incredibly well. Poets, De Kearney, who was a brilliant. I thought, what can I teach you? You are so wide awake and aware. But I mean, it was the standard, how to write a memo, how to write a book review and that sort of thing. And I did that for 2 years. And then in 1993, at the Technikons, they started academic support. Now, we know well from Sue Ellen Shea and her work at UCT, and I knew Nan Yale, she lived next door to us in Oxford Road. There was, and Ian Scott, in the early 80s, they had started with their program. And Professor Brian O'Connell was the director of the School of Education at Peninsula Technikon, and he got Merlin Mel funding. And he said, Cheryl, will you join the academic development team? And it was fantastic work. He called us academic freedom fighters. He says, there's a hole in the fence, find it. And I worked with a marvellous team. You see, we were all contract workers, absolutely committed to this work. You know, not everyone's going to choose to, you know, not know every 6 months if you're going to get a salary. And it was so necessary because the Peninsula Technikon had opened up to students from everywhere. We had returnees coming back who'd been with them Contowisizwe, mature and often very well educated and able, but we had other students who needed this development. And then we designed a course called LEAP, Learning in English for Academic Purposes, and we did everything. We designed, we developed the materials, we implemented it all, and then the coordinator, Cecilia Jacobs, did an evaluation of the project for a master's degree. And it was so satisfying. Because so often research work is separate from the practice. I mean, we literally would be, the lessons were hot off the printer, and these 6 teachers would go in and teach, and then we'd redesign. It was marvellous. So that was 93, 94, 94.
Turbulent times in South Africa as well.
Boy, and I was an election monitor at Kruger Hospital, met Jessie Jackson, in 95, and in 96, I thought, you know what, Cheryl, you've got to get a permanent, more secure work.
Yeah. You
need, access for sabbatical, for further studies, but also holidays with the children, and a pension and benefits and things like that. And I got appointed at Cape Technikon in 1996. Now, I tend to do extremes very well. You may have noticed. I mean, from Mona High School to Potchefstroom Universiteit vir Christelike Hoër Onderwys. From Peninsula Technikon to Cape Technikon I thought I was back in the 70s. It was still run by the Boerebond. It was very much old style South Africa. And yet the students were coming in. And the post that I was offered, once again, challenging, outside of work, I love it. I can't be too rule-bound. And I designed and developed it was an organisational intervention, a peer tutor service, where second or third years would run study groups, facilitate small learning groups.
Yes.
And it was my responsibility to work with the staff who wanted this form of academic development. Then they would recruit, I would administer the payment, I was given a budget, the students were paid, and I would train them and then observe their tutorials. And this was just at Cape Technikon. And then the mergers began.
And CPUT was born. And how was that for you?
I burnt out. It was extremely challenging because, some universities were saved from that experience, but we were 6 physical locations. So, Cape Technikon and Peninsula Technikon, I knew those 2 campuses and I knew the people in academic development. But Wellington College, Teachers Training College, Mowbray Teachers Training College merged as the education faculty.
Yes.
And Granger Bay. And I'd done work on bits and pieces. And
Athlone as well, I think.
Yes. It was extremely, Russell, there was a point, I think, maybe 2003 or 4, where I felt my entire body just go heavy and solid with yet another organogram on how to restructure CPUT. I thought, I can't do this. And so 2003, complete burnout. Admitted to a clinic, Kenilworth Clinic, with depression. Of course, it was a refuge for me because I could rest and recover. Went back, 2004, part-time, reduced hours, 5 or 8. And then they said the position requires full-time. So full-time 2005, and I was 55, and I took early retirement, and by then I'd been introduced to life coaching, and I touched on that.
So we're up to career number
6.
6 now.
And I loved every minute of being a life coach, because I had my own practice, of coaching coaches for the African Integral Coaching Centre, and I learned how to coach myself. The skills have been astounding for self-coaching.
So you had to train to be a coach?
I did,
yes.
And I took some of my retirement funds and paid upfront for the course. Didn't have to motivate it, didn't write a proposal, put it down. And I trained at the Integral Coaching Centre. I loved the course because they used the integral theorist, you know it. Okay. Ken Wilbur was our guru, and we were very qualified facilitators. So, and because of my background in education, I was asked to be a developmentor, a coaching, and an assessor. And it was marvellous work. But the cancer, I haven't told you about the cancer.
No, you haven't. So when did that strike?
So you see, the burnout's the first time the body says, you're living far too hard. 2011, Glenn gets diagnosed with prostate cancer in March. He has the prostate removed, and I get diagnosed in September with tongue cancer in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, the outsider, I don't fit the profile, because usually smokers or substance abuse users get cancer. 8 years later, I'm told why I'm in that category. I had a piece of tongue removed, fantastic team, excellent team at Panorama Hospital, together with Professor Joss Hiller, who's a oral pathologist at Stellenbosch University. And it took 6 months to diagnose it. They didn't know what it was. And then I had brachytherapy, which is it's wires that get wrapped into the tongue because they want him to radiate, because it's not a nice cancer to have. But the whole body is radiated. So for 7 days, I was isolated.
Sure.
It was an incredibly traumatic experience. And it's had its consequences, the radiation.
Okay.
But it didn't stop the cancer. It came back in 2015.
And was your speech affected by having your tongue, your tongue removed?
No, it's the back part of my tongue.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I was still running voice workshops after that, because I was, I did quite a few jobs. I still was part-time contracted to CPUT, and lecturers knew that I ran voice workshops and those sort of things. So I carried on working. Glenn died of, I think he had a lump in his neck, which was endocrine, most probably tract cancer, and it was an incredibly traumatic death because they gave him radiation, but he had to have a tracheotomy inserted. So we never heard him speak from March until his death in August of 2013. Both Jessica and Daniel were at home, living back home. Dan had been offered a job in South Korea, but he chose not to do that. I've hardly spoken about my children. Anyway, but Daniel qualified as a fine arts at Rhodes University, and Jessica in the journalism department. And both were doing contract freelance work. But Dan thinking of going to teach in Korea. And so 2014 was a recovery, but a hang of a lot of, dealing with an estate, sorting out an estate.
Well, and grief, I assume.
And grief and coaching. I still carried on coaching because I was so much part of that team. And, the coaching coaches was challenging work because, I had to know my theory.
Yeah.
And then assessing, which was huge portfolios. So by 2015, when the cancer returned at the end of that year, it was stress. And 2016 is landlady. 6th career, I incarnate now as a landlady. And it's just been an absolute wonderful period of resting, but also, getting involved with the students.
So Cheryl, you mentioned before about your Methodism being, quite important to you. You've described a lot of struggles and transitions and, things you've had to deal with your health and the passing of your husband and, the career challenges. To what extent was your faith a sustainer for you during that period? And also, was it one of the motivators for you? You've obviously got a huge heart for students and for justice. Was that linked to your sense of faith?
It definitely was. The journey of my health has been a deep inward journey. So my faith has deepened. And what I was required to do when my body called me home, to be spiritually embodied was to be in myself. And so I found deep solace in rest. I practice centering prayer. I'm part of the contemplative movement. I have a group that meet once a month, and I found that incredibly nourishing and sustaining and deepening of my faith. The other thing is that the work of Richard Raw, Cynthia Bourgeot, David Stentor-Ross, and the mystics have truly been where my faith journey has taken me. And I now, having had the very challenging experience and a near death with chemotherapy last year, from March 2020, and then by June, because the tongue cancer had tracked into a lymph node that had to be removed. And it's almost, I don't, the word, I am more embodied in an emotional, in a spiritual, in an intellectual way than ever before, through the journey with my health and the healing. It has been an astounding experience.
And what's your current state of health? I mean, are you out of the woods, or are you...
Well, I've had very good reports from the team that I don't even go to the head and neck clinic team that I did for all those years. I see now only the surgeon, the oncology surgeon, and he's very happy. He said I was a salvage operation. So it was incredibly serious. When I asked him to show me where the vagus nerve was, I just couldn't believe where he was having to go in and cut out this tumour. And the pathologist, when I told him that I nearly died taking the Red Devil, Taxol is a very, very strong chemotherapy drug, and they use it a lot. And for some systems, the whole system shuts down. And I said, but you know, Profila, I nearly died on chemotherapy. And he said, now I know why when I cut open the tumour, there was an orange liquid. That was the Taxol. So it killed the tumour. So to answer your question, I think it killed the tumour. But really, really, Russell, chemotherapy affects every part of the ecosystem of the body. So there's ongoing repair, recovery, and I'm doing that. I have the time to do it now. I've had a sabbatical because I have no tutors and no dependents at the moment. I hope to have students. I really would like to have another 1 or 2 students, or maybe change the profile and have an older person living with me who wants to live simply. I don't want to go into a retirement home or retirement complex yet. If ever. Yeah. So does that answer? I mean,
Yes,
my heritage through my marriage into the Hewson family has been very beautiful. And it's continued, it's just developed, I'd rather like a Rondebosch uniting church. Uniting. Because I think the more faith systems are united and meet together is more or less where I long to be. I've been told about my passion is reading.
Yes.
Can you imagine what joy I've had in this recovery period? I read a lot of novels, and strangely enough, I've suddenly become fascinated by economics. And my guru is Yanis Varoufakis. He may have been a failed minister of finance in Greece, but I think he's got a great vision for the economy of the world. And theatre. I love live theatre and have missed it so much. My daughter worked for an incredible organisation in Observatory called Theatre Arts Administrative, the Blue Door, and those young emerging directors and actors are doing phenomenal work. And she also worked at the Baxter, so I saw a lot of theatre there, and movies, art house movies.
Lavia Theatre?
Lavia is my favourite, and documentary for free online. Last year, this year, the European Festival free online, and I feast on it.
Wonderful.
So those are three passions that are very much integrated now into this retiring life.
And I assume you still have a canine companion?
Of course, good for you for remembering that.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I have a wire-haired fox terrier called Finn, and he's full of character. He's top dog. He's not liked by everybody, but we live together marvellously well. Yeah. So, yes, and my previous dog, was Cassidy, an Irish terrier. Now, I love terriers, and the photograph that I'll need to send over is of a bull terrier, white bull terriers my mother had,
right.
But he was the main at our wedding. Then I had a wonderful wedding at my parents' home in Great Brack River.
Right. And grandparenthood, is that on the horizon?
No, it isn't. Just not yet, because my children have only really just left home. Dan is in Hong Kong, and it's fabulous. He's enjoying it. He's in teaching conversational English and loving Hong Kong and the students. Teaches from 3 to 12-year-olds, and Jess continues as a freelance journalist in Johannesburg.
Right.
Yeah. So no permanent partners there yet, but Glenn and I took forever. Glenn was 10 years older than I.
Sure.
So the patterns maybe, that they're going to wait until they're older parents.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fascinating to hear so much of your story, and you tell it so eloquently and passionately, so it's been wonderful, Cheryl, so thank you so much, and a chance for us all to get to know you better.
Yes.
And I hope that this latest transition to RUC will be a joyous one for you, and we'll all be meeting together more frequently and in full soon, and you'll have a chance to get to know everyone better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.